This happened back in 2019 when I was 21 years old. I was home from college for the summer, staying at my parents' place, and I pretty much just spontaneously decided to go camping in the woods right behind their house. And this forest wasn't just some small neighborhood park. It was massive, dense, and stretched on for miles, most of it completely untouched. This was a spur-of-the-moment trip. I just woke up one morning and thought, yeah, let's do this. I packed my gear and figured I'd just stay for one night. The thing is, I'd done this exact trip countless times before. It was almost routine, and probably because of that familiarity, that comfort. I had my guard completely down. This wasn't some grand expedition. I just wanted to get away from the Wi-Fi, do a little tech detox, and just breathe in some fresh air. I let my parents know where I was headed, told them I'd still be within cell range if they needed me, and then I left around 4 p.m. to find a spot for the night. I hiked for about an hour, the only sound being the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. Eventually, I found a nice little clearing. I pitched my tent, cleared a small spot, and got a little campfire going. The fire crackled, pushing back the chill that was just starting to settle in as the sky darkened. It felt really cozy. Watching the sunset, seeing the sky bleed from bright orange into a deep purple, just made it perfect. This was exactly the kind of night I was hoping for. Alone, total silence, and feeling completely disconnected from the rest of E-World. But of course, that feeling of peace didn't last long. The sun was just about to disappear behind the treetops, giving way to the darkness that was slowly swallowing the forest, when I heard a voice. It was definitely a man's voice. He was mumbling, or just talking to himself. The sound was faint, but it cut through the silence of the woods in a weird way. It almost felt like it was echoing, as if it was coming from every direction at once. It made it impossible to pinpoint where exactly it was coming from. It was also dark enough that the shadows from the trees were starting to dance in the firelight, twisting the familiar woods into a maze of strange shapes, making it hard to see anything clearly. I need to make one thing clear. The woods behind my parents' house, where I grew up, are massive and largely unexplored. There are no marked trails out here. This isn't a place people casually stroll through. Running into anyone out here, at this hour, was next to impossible. At first, I tried to rationalize it. I figured they'd just pass by, maybe a lost hunter, and that would be the end of it. But the voice kept going. It wasn't moving away, but it wasn't getting any closer, either. It just hovered, right at the edge of my hearing, for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a long time. Long enough for a very alarming realization to sink in. They weren't just passing through, they were there. And maybe they were staying close on purpose. My heart started to pound. That cozy feeling was completely gone. Finally, I took a deep breath and called out, just a simple, "Hello?" to see if I'd get a response. But before I even finished the word, the voice cut out, instantly. Like someone had just hit a mute button. The woods went completely silent, a silence that was somehow worse than the mumbling. It felt heavy and unnatural. I was suddenly really uncomfortable. I waited a few seconds, then called out again, louder this time. "Is somebody there?" No voice, no reply. Nothing but the crackling fire and the pounding of my own heart. Okay. Now I was genuinely creeped out. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. There was maybe 20 or 30 minutes of weak daylight left, that sick, grayish-blue light of twilight. I decided to move. There was no way I was going to sit there scared all night and let this ruin my trip. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but my gut was screaming at me. In just a few minutes, I quickly smothered the fire, grabbed my tent and my pack, and headed back into the thickening dark, trying to find another place to call home for the night. I wasn't having much luck. After 15 minutes, with the dying light pushing me, I realized I couldn't be picky. I just settled on the spot I was standing in. It was basically just a patch of ground between some trees. Not clear, not comfortable. At the time, though, I figured that was a good thing. By the time I finished setting up, there was no light left at all. The sun was completely gone. The woods were dead silent, but this time, the silence felt peaceful, in a strange way. I told myself I was far enough away now, and in this silence, I'd be able to hear if that guy came back for any reason. I started another small campfire, just bright enough to see. I soaked in the warmth for a bit before pulling out my snack bag. I needed something to calm my nerves. I grabbed the stuff to make s'mores. I found a small stick, skewered a marshmallow, and held it over the flames. I don't know why, but roasting marshmallows is one of my favorite things to do. Watching it slowly turn golden brown, feeling the heat. It just helps me zone out. I made a few s'mores and sat by the fire for a long time, trying to get that original feeling of safety back. A few hours, at least, passed just like that. It was getting late, probably close to midnight, and I'd let the fire die down. It was still glowing, just flickering embers, but it was half as bright as before. And then, I heard it. The rustling of leaves directly behind me. It sounded like it came from somewhere behind me, to the left of my campsite. This wasn't mumbling. This was footsteps. It was pitch black. And as I whipped my head around to look, whatever it was, stopped moving. I called out again, my voice probably shaking a little. "Who's there?" Honestly, I wasn't expecting an answer after what happened last time. But a few seconds later, a man stepped out of the woods and walked right into the weak light of my dying fire. What startled me wasn't just his appearance. It was that he came from a different direction than where I was looking. Different from where the sound had come from. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, with this huge grin, but his voice didn't sound apologetic at all. He just casually walked over to the fire and sat down. Right next to me. Close. Too close. He held his hands out to the embers. A completely, absurdly normal gesture. He acted like he was supposed to be there. Or like he knew me. Like we had arranged this. It took me a second to process. Can I help you? I think you might have the wrong campsite." He didn't look at me. He just stared into the embers. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. I said, "No." I had no idea what part of my question he was saying no to. No. He wasn't lost? No. I couldn't help him? Either way, it was a terrifying answer, especially with nothing else. I had to think for a few seconds about what to do. Run? Yell? So there was this horrible, tense silence as we both just sat by the fire, saying nothing. It got so tense that I just blurted out the first thing that came to my mind, a question that, in hindsight, I probably never should have asked. "Were you the one I heard talking in the woods? Back at my other campsite?" The man kept staring at the fire, but I could see, even in the dim light, his face completely darken. The grin vanished. "Must have been someone else," he said. His voice was flat now, much colder, a total contrast to that fake, friendly vibe from before. Something was desperately wrong with this entire situation. The alarm bells in my head were screaming. I was trapped. I had no idea how to get out of this without provoking him. Before I could even process that statement, A twig snapped. Crack. The sound was unmistakable. This wasn't the rustling of leaves. This was a clear, deliberate footstep. I whipped my head around. It came from the exact spot, behind me, to the left, where I'd heard the first noise. And instantly, a cold bolt of electricity shot down my spine. The man sitting next to me hadn't moved. He wasn't the one who made the sound. My heart just stopped. My throat went dry. He wasn't alone. There was someone else. Someone who had been in the dark, watching me this entire time. The noise from the other direction. When this guy appeared, it was a diversion. A trap. They had been hurting me. I slowly, very slowly, turned my head back to the man by the fire. He wasn't looking at the embers anymore. He was staring directly at me. Honestly, I don't even remember if he was smiling or angry or anything. All I remember, all that will be burned into my mind forever, was his eyes. They were cold and completely empty. This wasn't the look of someone who'd been caught. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. The game was over. I didn't think. I just reacted. I exploded up from my seat and just bolted into the trees, in the opposite direction of both sounds. I heard one of them yell angrily to the other one, something like, "Get him!" And immediately, I heard heavy boots crashing through the underbrush right behind me. The darkness was total, but luckily, that was my only advantage. Growing up with these woods as my backyard, I knew them by heart, even in the pitch black. I didn't need light to know where I was going. I could hear them stumbling behind me. They weren't familiar with the terrain. As I pushed deeper, I lost them. I didn't stop. I just ran, adrenaline fueling me, until I burst out of the tree line and collapsed onto the pavement. From there, I ran straight to my parents' house. They called 911 for me. The next morning, of course, I led a couple of police officers back to the campsite. And this is the part that haunts me the most. Everything was gone. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Not just my tent. The fire was extinguished and professionally buried. No trace of the marshmallows. No clear footprints. It was as if no one had ever been there. This didn't make things better. It made them 1,000 times worse. It confirmed they weren't just random thugs. They were organized. They knew how to erase their presence, and they were very, very good at it. And that just raises the most terrifying question of all. How many times had they done this? What did they do? To the people who didn't get away? It probably won't surprise you to hear. I never went back into the woods behind my parents' house again. It was the middle of summer, and for someone like me, a huge hiking and camping enthusiast, that means I always get the itch to get out. I'm always looking for experiences that push my limits, searching for real solitude. I heard from a friend about these old fire lookouts that you can rent. Apparently, they're decommissioned Forest Service observation stations, usually just perched in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization. The idea. Man, it just immediately hooked me. Total isolation. The one I picked was just about the most remote one I could find. It was deep in a national forest that rarely saw any traffic. The weird thing was, it was easy to rent, basically wide open for the entire summer. That should have been a massive red flag, but at the time, I just figured I'd hit the jackpot. And besides, I liked the challenge of the hike. The catch was, I could only find a single photo of it on the booking site. The picture was super old, grainy, and looked like it was taken decades ago. I really had no idea what I was walking into. I knew it was built in the 1950s, so it was bound to be rustic. But how rustic? Or if it had been restored or maintained, I was completely in the dark. I packed my usual hiking gear, a 60-liter pack, sleeping bag, freeze-dried food for 3 days, a water filter, and a knife on my hip, and started the trek at 9 a.m. There wasn't much scenery, at least not for the first few hours. No majestic valleys or crystal blue lakes, just dense, rugged, up and down forest terrain. The trail wasn't really a trail anymore. It was more like a vague suggestion of a path that nature had reclaimed, full of jagged rocks and roots just waiting to trip you up. I had to constantly check my GPS just to make sure I was even heading in the right direction. However, after 5 hours of non-stop hiking, drenched in sweat and my leg muscles starting to scream, I finally caught a glimpse of the lookout. It was still way off in the distance, perched on the very peak of a mountain. It looked tiny, like a forgotten box. It wasn't one of those tall, spindly ones on steel stilts. It looked more like a cabin raised about 10 or 15 feet off the ground by thick wooden posts. It took another hour of steep, uphill hiking to actually reach it. The hike alone was worth it for the view. It was breathtaking. It felt like I could see the entire world. Hundreds of miles of uninterrupted, deep green forest, without a single trace of civilization. The lookout itself, however, was in rough shape. It was visibly old, with faded wooden planks and a few makeshift patches of rusty metal. It had a spiral metal staircase, also rusty, with about 20 steps leading up to the walkway that wrapped around the entire station. When I pushed the door open, the inside was completely empty. The smell of must and old wood hit me instantly. It wasn't glamorous, but frankly, it could have been worse. And for this level of isolation and this view, I'd take it any day. I had a few hours of sunlight left, so I dropped my pack, made some dinner, and relaxed on the rocky outcrop outside, just sitting and breathing. It was so quiet up there. Not just regular quiet, but an almost deafening stillness. No cars, no people. Just the faint call of distant birds and the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks of the tower. I was exhausted from the hike, so after the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a deep, bruised purple, I rolled out my sleeping gear on the hardwood floor and settled in. It was only about 8 p.m., but even though my body was exhausted, my mind was wired. I couldn't fall asleep as fast as I wanted to. I just lay there, listening to the absolute silence of the mountain, feeling the isolation. I think maybe 30 or 40 minutes had passed, and I was just starting to drift off. And then I heard it. At first, it was faint, almost lost in the wind. But then it got clearer, unmistakable. It wasn't just footsteps on dry leaves. It was metal, a heavy, rhythmic clang, clang, clang. Someone was coming up. Someone was on the spiral metal staircase. My heart just about fell out of my chest. I was 6 hours from civilization. No one could be here by accident. At this hour. Before I could even process it and look outside, the footsteps were right outside the door. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and lunged for the door. And that's when I realized, with dawning horror, it was a simple wooden door. And it had no lock, not even a simple latch on the inside. A few seconds later, a man appeared around the corner. He was older, maybe late 40s, with shaggy, kind of longish blonde hair. But the weirdest part was, he wasn't startled to see me. He wasn't surprised at all. It was almost like he knew I was up here, like he was expecting me. "Great place to spend a few nights, huh?" he said, flashing this uneven grin as he stepped closer. I took a step back, agreeing hesitantly. My entire body was frozen. I told him I had the place booked for the next 3 nights. I was annoyed, but mostly, I was just scared. I knew there was nothing else for miles. Him being here, at this hour, at the same time as me. It wasn't just weird. It was impossible. I asked him if he was camping nearby, trying to keep my voice as steady as I could. "Actually, I was hoping to stay up here tonight," he said. That same grin plastered on his face. I wasn't sure how to respond. "Oh," I stammered. "I'm sorry, man, but I already have it reserved." He tilted his head, the smile fading a little. "Well, it looks like you got plenty of room in there. I mean, it's just you up here, right?" That question, and the way he emphasized just you, it chilled me to the bone. He was probing. After a second's hesitation, I lied. I had to lie. "No. Actually, my buddy's on his way up. He's just a few minutes behind me. We really can't have you staying here with us." He stared at me. The smile was completely gone, replaced by a flat, cold expression. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me like he was weighing my lie. Then, he gave one sharp nod and started to leave. It wasn't until he turned to go back down the stairs that I noticed the most terrifying thing of all. He had no backpack, no sleeping bag, no water bottle, no gear of any kind. Nothing. The question just kept looping in my head. How does someone hike for 6 hours, up a remote mountain, in the dark, without carrying a single thing? Even if they planned on using the lookout for shelter, they'd have to bring food, right? I had a deep, sick feeling about that man. I stood at the door, listening to his metal footsteps fade down the stairs until it was silent. I stayed awake for a long time after that, just staring out into the black forest below. Eventually, exhaustion won out over the fear, and I got back in my sleeping bag and passed out. I woke up in the morning feeling a little better. The sunlight made everything seem less terrifying. For a while, I spent the first hour making coffee and just enjoying the view. When I went down from the lookout to get more water, though, there was something stuck to the wooden railing at the bottom. It was a note, folded up and jammed into a crack in the wood. It was just a crumpled piece of paper with the word "sorry" written on it in ballpoint pen, and a crude smiley face drawn next to it. I figured it had to be from the guy. But if he put it here, it meant he'd come back. He had come back at the middle of the night, while I was dead asleep, completely defenseless, in an unlocked room. He'd snuck up those stairs again, stood right outside my door while I slept, and left this. It wasn't an apology. It was a threat. It was a message. I know you were lying. I know you're alone. I can get to you whenever I want. I immediately felt deeply unsafe. Despite this, I decided to go for a hike, mostly to sweep the area for any sign of the man. I wandered through the woods downhill from the lookout, searching for a campsite, a fire pit, anything. There was nothing. It was the same dense forest I'd hiked through, and I couldn't find any campsite or discarded gear. It was like he had just vanished. I went back to the lookout, but the peace and quiet from the day before was completely gone. The whole rest of the day, I was on edge. I felt watched. Every time the wind whistled through the tower, I jumped. I stayed up much later than the night before. I had my little battery-powered lantern hanging on the wall, and I was just existing, pacing around this wooden box. I was just thinking and staring out the windows into the pitch black. I want to say I didn't even start getting ready for bed until almost midnight, maybe 1 a.m. I was organizing my gear, and then I grabbed the lantern and went down the stairs into the woods to take a quick leak before bed. I walked to the just edge of the tree line, maybe 20 feet from the base of the tower. But as I got there, I saw something move in front of me. Just a glimpse. A human-shaped silhouette moving out of the dim light of my lantern. It was there 1 second, and then gone into the black. I froze. Who's there? The dead silence that followed my voice just made everything feel worse. I practically ran back to the lookout, stumbling on the stairs. It didn't feel any safer inside, though. And then the horrible realization hit me. The windows covered every single inch of the walls. I was in a glass cage, with my lantern on. I was like an actor on a stage, completely exposed. If someone was out there, they could see my every move. Meanwhile, all I could see was darkness. A part of me really wanted to leave, but hiking out now, in the pitch black, with a barely existing trail, was probably worse than staying put. I left the lantern hanging on the wall and just watched out the window, down at the woods below. I was focused on one spot, the base of the stairs, making sure no one tried to come up. The longer I stood there watching, the more this dread built up in my body. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided to pack my things. Now. At least then I could make a run for it if I had to. As I shoved my gear into my pack, I would hold my breath every 30 seconds and turn back to the window to look at the stairs. They were empty. Then I'd go back to packing, repeating this over and over until I finally had everything in my bag and was ready to go. I set my pack against the wall, ready to go. Everything was set. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the hammering in my chest. Then I turned back to the window for one last check, and my heart just stopped. He was there. He was at the bottom of the stairs, standing on the very first step, motionless, completely still, just standing there, in the faint light spilling from my window, staring. No, not at me, but staring at the staircase itself, like he was waiting there. I could only see parts of him through the railings, but I knew it was the man from yesterday. The shaggy blonde hair, no backpack. My blood turned to ice. A creeping numbness spread from my stomach. Why was he back? And why was he just standing there, motionless, like a soulless mannequin? Did he know I was watching him? Was he waiting for me to go to sleep? And what if he decided to come up again? God, the door. The door had no lock. My mind was racing. I don't know how long I stood at the window, staring at him. It could have been 2 minutes, or an eternity, before the man finally moved. He didn't turn away. He took a few steps back, slowly, deliberately. He paused for a moment, still staring at the tower, and then he walked away. However, the path he took was obscured from my view by the walkway, so I lost sight of him. He just melted into the darkness. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like, I'll see you later. In that instant, I knew for certain that man was hunting me. My lie was exposed. That sorry note was a mockery. He knew I was alone, and he was playing with me. My gut was screaming that if I stayed any longer, something truly, irreversibly awful was going to happen. I waited a few agonizing minutes. Then, I grabbed my bag, switched off the lantern, plunging the room into total blackness. I pulled out my pocket knife, the blade flicking open with a small click. I moved silently to the door, held my breath, and stepped out onto the walkway. The cold metal under my feet. In the mountain silence. It sounded like a gunshot. I slowly made my way down the spiral stairs, down to the ground below the lookout. The feeling of walking away from that tower and into the dark woods, I can't even describe it. I knew it was possible he was still watching me, that he could be shadowing me into the trees, just a few feet away, smiling in the dark. For that reason, I gripped my knife so hard my knuckles were white. I walked for about 15 minutes in near total blackness, stumbling constantly. That's when the trail became too hard to see. I had to pull out my lantern and turn it on, to its lowest setting. I felt like I was painting a giant target on my back. I just had to hope I'd gotten far enough away that he couldn't keep up and couldn't see the light. The next 5 hours were a living hell of exhaustion and paranoia. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me spin around, knife clenched. I constantly had the feeling that someone was walking parallel to me, just outside the weak glow of my lamp. By that time, though, the sun was starting to rise, and the gray light of dawn finally broke. I was able to finish the hike and get out of those woods. I think it's hard to really understand how terrifying those nights were. But there's one thing I keep thinking about. I had told that man I'd booked the tower for 3 nights. My lie about my friend was clearly exposed. He knew I'd lied, and he thought I'd still be there on the 3rd night. So if I hadn't left early, and had actually stayed that 3rd night, alone on that mountain, in that unlocked room, I don't want to think about what might have happened. I decided to take a trip that a lot of people dream about, but honestly, very few ever actually take. I drove from the very top of Montana, crossed the border, and aimed to go straight up into the Alaskan wilderness. This wasn't some simple weekend getaway. I had converted my SUV into a mobile home, a makeshift camper, ready for 2 solid months on the road. And the main goal? To conquer the entire length of the Alaska Highway. But this road, the Alcan, as it's often called, it has a reputation for a reason. It's not just a road. Imagine it like a thin asphalt thread, cutting through thousands of miles of absolute Western Canadian wilderness. It's remote, it's rugged, and it does not forgive anyone who isn't prepared. I knew that, and I was prepared for every scenario. Well, almost every scenario. Of all the things I worried about, there was one detail that left me feeling more uneasy than the others. You see, because I had to drive through Canada, I wasn't allowed to bring any kind of self-defense weapon. Normally, back in the States, I'd have a firearm tucked away under my driver's seat. It wasn't for show. It was a mental insurance policy. Something to keep you calm in the absolute worst-case scenario. But on this trip, I didn't have it. It was just me, and the thin metal walls of my SUV. It was a naked feeling. Very vulnerable. The first day was fine. 8 hours of driving. Exhausting but smooth. This stretch of the road was still somewhat civilized, but I knew the next leg would be worse, where gas stations are just tiny dots, hundreds of miles apart. You have to stop and fill up every single chance you get. As the sun started to dip, I was running on fumes. My eyes were burning from staring at the road for so long. I decided to pull off at the first trail I saw. It wasn't a marked campground, just a worn-down turnout that led directly into the deep woods. This was my style. Total solitude, not a soul around. Since it was pitch black, I couldn't see much. Just trees, everywhere. Not a single light. Not another car. Perfect. I drew the window curtains, hopped into the back, and just passed out. I slept like a rock, completely undisturbed. The next morning, before getting back on the road, I wanted to stretch my legs and get some air. I stepped outside, saw a small path, and just followed it. Maybe 5 minutes of walking, and I came upon another campsite. But something was completely wrong. It wasn't just messy like people had left trash. No, it looked destroyed. Someone had clearly been here, probably last night, and they had left. In an extreme hurry. Half their gear was still there. The other half was just torn apart, thrown everywhere. I saw a tent that had been slashed open, its fabric flapping in the early wind. A camp chair was knocked on its side. Food. Food was scattered everywhere. Looking at it, you could only think one thing: a struggle. A violent struggle had happened right here. I didn't even take 30 seconds. I turned on my heel and went straight back to my vehicle. I didn't need a closer look. A voice in my head was screaming, "Go! Get out of here!" I didn't know if someone was still lingering in the woods, or what had made those people flee, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. My gut was screaming at me. I walked quickly back down the path. My heart started to beat a little faster. And just as I cleared the trees, back at my parking spot, my heart dropped into my stomach. There was a truck parked there now, right next to my SUV. It was a jet black pickup truck. It looked old, dented in a few places, and most importantly, the windows were tinted completely black. You couldn't see anything inside. No one was standing outside of it. It just sat there, silent, engine off. I hadn't heard it pull in. Between the chaotic campsite and this truck appearing like a ghost, I knew one thing for sure: they were in the truck. They were watching me. I tried to stay calm, to act casual, like I was just coming back from a walk. I got to my SUV, my hand trembling as I put the key in the lock, hit the door locks immediately, and started the engine. I left right away. I didn't even bother to wonder if I was overreacting. The answer was obvious. Get out. I just drove. I'm not kidding. I drove for 3, maybe 4 solid hours after leaving that campsite. 4 straight hours. My eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Cold sweat prickling the back of my neck. Every truck that passed in the other direction made me jump. And the road, it just got more and more desolate. No more houses, no more power lines, just forest, mountains, and me. Eventually, I reached the next gas station. It was like a relic, frozen in time, run down, looked like it was built in the 70s. And there was only a single, 2-sided pump, not a soul in sight. The only convenience store was a small, dark log cabin. I got out and started pumping my gas. I have to admit, the scenery was spectacular. Snow-capped mountains in every direction. The silence was absolute, almost deafening. That kind of massive beauty usually makes you feel small in a good way. But that day, it just made me feel exposed. Completely and totally exposed. I stood there, listening to the slow click, click, click of the old gas pump. And then, after a few minutes, I saw a truck coming down the road. As it got closer, my stomach tightened. My skin crawled. It was the one, the jet black pickup from the campsite. It slowed down. It turned into the gas station. And it parked on the other side of the pump, directly opposite me. My heart was hammering in my chest. I stared across the pump. I waited. I waited for the driver to get out, to go inside and pay, or at least grab the pump handle. Nothing, not a single movement. The door didn't open. The engine seemed to be off. It was as if the truck was just a dead block of metal, watching me through that black-tinted glass, which reflected a distorted image of me in the mountains behind me. My rational mind tried to kick in. They just need gas. Everyone needs gas. But my gut was screaming. Why did they pull into that campsite, park, and then leave right after me? And why weren't they getting out of the truck now? Thankfully, my tank hit full with a loud clunk. I hung the nozzle up as fast as I could, twisted the gas cap on, and got back in my SUV. I didn't run. I walked fast, trying not to show how freaked out I was. I think the scariest part was that I had never even seen the driver. An invisible threat is always worse. I started the engine, wheels kicking up gravel as I peeled out of that station without looking back. I knew it for sure now. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being followed. I felt a little better knowing I had a full tank. I was just going to drive. Put as much distance between us as possible. I told myself I'd find another spot, but this time, in the daylight, so I wouldn't be parking blind like the night before. I drove for a long time, So long my muscles started to cramp. I drove until the sun started to set, painting the sky red. I found a spot. It seemed okay. It was much more hidden. The trail was almost overgrown. No signs anyone had been here recently. Definitely not a popular camp spot. I felt safer. Honestly, I really wanted to set up my tent. I was dying to stretch out instead of sleeping cramped in the back of the SUV. But something in me, that same gut feeling from the morning, said no. A cold little voice whispered, "Stay in the vehicle. Lock the doors. Tonight, you stay in the vehicle." So, I just made a quick dinner outside in the fading light and got back in the SUV as soon as it was dark. I locked all the doors, double-checked. I told myself tomorrow would be a shorter day. I was almost to Alaska. To kill time, I decided to watch some videos I'd pre-downloaded on my phone. I stayed up like that for about 4 hours. I was trying to feel comfortable. Outside, the darkness was total. No moon, just me in the forest. But every few minutes, I'd pause the video, hold my breath, and just listen. Just the wind, just a branch cracking somewhere far off. I told myself I was safe. I'd lost them. They had given up. I was actually getting excited to finally cross into Alaska in the mornings. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard it. It wasn't the wind. Absolutely not. This sound was close. Right outside my window. Even hearing it for just a second, I knew 100% it was a person walking. It wasn't the rustle of a small animal. It was the crunch of boots on dry twigs and dead leaves. The footsteps were heavy, unmistakable, and deliberate. My heart leaped into my throat. I slammed my phone down and shot up, trying to peek through the crack in the window curtain, but I was a second too late. A face was there, pressed against the glass, right where I had just been, staring in at me. I couldn't make out the features in the dark, but I could see the shape of a head. And the eyes. They were wide, the whites of them reflecting the faint glow still coming from my phone screen. It was unmistakable. It was a man. I recoiled, sucking in a breath. The face seemed startled too. It pulled back and vanished into the blackness. Instantly, not even thinking. I scrambled over the back seats, lunging for the driver's seat. And that is when I heard the second noise. A horrific crash echoed, rocking the entire vehicle. The sound of shattering glass. A second guy had just smashed my rear window. Pure panic set in. My fingers were trembling. They didn't feel like my own. I was shaking, fumbling to get the key into the ignition. I could hear the other guy reaching in through the broken glass, feeling for the door latch from the inside. On top of that, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and the first guy, the one with the face, was sprinting around to my driver's side door. No, oh, I muttered. In a sheer panic, somehow, I jammed the key in. I twisted it. The engine roared to life. At that exact same instant, I heard the click as the guy in the back popped the lock. I didn't think. I just slammed the gas to the floor. The SUV lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt, kicking up gravel. As I shot out of the trail, my headlights swept across the road, and they illuminated it. Oh, God. It was parked there, perfectly hidden in the brush, just yards from the entrance to my trail. It was the jet black pickup truck. My heart stopped. They hadn't found me by accident. They had followed me. They had been hunting me. They had waited until it was dark. I drove like a madman for maybe a mile. Then I pulled over, heart hammering against my ribs. The back door was still wide open, banging in the wind. I jumped out, slammed it shut, and called 911 on the weak, spotty signal I had. Obviously, in the middle of nowhere, it was pointless. They were long gone. I hadn't gotten a plate. It was too dark. A hopeless case. You know what? I still made it to Alaska. I got the window fixed. I tried to enjoy the rest of my trip, but it was tainted. And to this day, I just keep thinking, those two men, what was their plan? Breaking into a car in the middle of the woods at night, knowing damn well I was inside. What were they planning on doing to me? Honestly, I don't want to know the answer.